You ever had one of those nights where everything feels wrong, like the air itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen? I used to think scary stories were just stories, but one winter night, alone on a dark, snow-covered highway, I learned that some nightmares are real. It was late, past midnight, and I was driving through the back roads of upstate New York, heading home after visiting my parents. The highway was deserted, just me, the snow, and miles of empty roads stretching ahead. The radio played some old rock station, the only sound besides the hum of my tires against the icy pavement. The snowfall had picked up, and my headlights barely cut through the thick white curtain in front of me. The trees on either side of the road stood tall and frozen, their twisted branches like skeletal fingers reaching out toward my car. I should have taken the main highway, but I was in a hurry, and this route was faster. That's when I saw it, a dark figure standing on the shoulder of the road. My heart jumped, and I gripped the wheel tighter. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer, maybe. But as I got closer, I saw it was a man. He wore an old-fashioned black coat, buttoned up tight, and a wide-brimmed hat, the kind you'd see in those old Civil War photographs. He wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the trees. I don't know why, but every instinct in me screamed to keep driving. As I passed him, I swear I saw his head turn to follow me, but there was nothing under the hat, just darkness. I pressed my foot down on the gas. The road twisted and turned, the snow thickening, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the car steady. I told myself it was just my imagination, maybe the snow was playing tricks on me. But then the radio started to crackle, static, a low hum followed by whispers too faint to understand but definitely there. My fingers scrambled for the knob, trying to switch stations, but the whispers only grew louder. Then the voice came, "Why? Why didn't you stop?" My breath caught in my throat. The voice was deep, hoarse, as if it hadn't been used in centuries. It wasn't coming from the radio anymore, it was inside the car. I slammed the dial off, my heart pounding. The whispering didn't stop. In the rearview mirror, I saw something move in the back seat. I nearly lost control of the car. My hands were slick with sweat, and my foot barely touched the brake before I skidded on the ice. My tires screeched, and I swerved onto the shoulder, my headlights flickering as the engine sputtered. Silence. For a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing. I turned around slowly, dreading what I might see. Nothing. The back seat was empty. I let out a nervous laugh, my breath fogging up the windshield. Maybe I was just tired, seeing things. But then something tapped on my window, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I turned my head, and my stomach dropped. It was him, the man in the coat, standing just outside my driver's side window, staring at me with that same empty darkness where his face should be. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, without warning, the passenger door clicked open. The cold air rushed in, bringing the scent of decayed leaves and something else, something rotten. I scrambled to lock the doors, but it was too late. The air inside the car turned thick, suffocating, like something ancient and angry had just climbed in with me. Then the whispers started again, but this time they weren't outside, they were right in my ear. "Keep driving." I didn't think, I just stomped on the gas. My tires spun wildly on the ice before catching, and the car shot forward, fishtailing down the road. My hands were shaking, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Every second, I expected to see him sitting there, his empty face staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the road, the endless snow, and the dark trees flashing by. I drove like that for miles, my heart slamming against my ribs, every muscle in my body wired with fear. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw the glow of streetlights in the distance, a gas station, civilization. I pulled in, tires screeching, and jumped out of the car before it even fully stopped. The attendant inside looked up, startled, as I burst through the doors. I must have looked insane, wild-eyed, shaking, covered in cold sweat. "You okay, man?" he asked. I couldn't speak, I just nodded, trying to catch my breath. I turned back to the parking lot, half expecting to see him standing beside my car, but the lot was empty. The snow around my car was untouched, no footprints, no sign that anyone had ever been there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in that gas station until the sun came up, nursing a bad cup of coffee and staring out the window, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Nothing did. But when I finally got back to my car, I noticed something I hadn't before, something that made my stomach turn to ice. On the passenger seat, where no one had been sitting, was a single black button, old and rusted, like it had been torn from a coat that hadn't been worn in over 100 years. Story number 2, some roads take you home, others take you somewhere else. I learned that the hard way. It was mid-December, right before Christmas, and I was driving back from a work trip in Montana, cutting through the desolate back roads of North Dakota. Snow had been falling all day, piling up in thick drifts along the highway. It was late, probably around 1 a.m., and the road was dead. No cars, no streetlights, just the black sky and the endless white fields stretching into nothing. The radio had gone to static an hour ago, my phone had zero signal, and my gas tank was dangerously low. Not a great situation, but I wasn't too worried. I had driven this route before. There was a little gas station about 30 miles ahead, a last stop before the real emptiness of the plains. Then, out of nowhere, my headlights flickered just for a second, enough to make my heart skip a beat. I tapped the dashboard. Maybe the cold was messing with the wiring. The roads were bad, but my car was built for this kind of weather, an old but reliable SUV. So I kept going, watching the snowflakes swirl like ghosts in my high beams. And that's when I saw it, a shape standing in the middle of the road. My stomach clenched, and I hit the brakes hard, the tires skidding on the icy pavement. The car came to a stop just a few feet away, my headlights shining directly onto a person, at least I think it was a person. She was barefoot, wearing nothing but a tattered white nightgown, her long black hair tangled and frozen in thick strands. The snow around her was undisturbed, no footprints, no tracks, like she had just appeared there. She wasn't moving, just standing, staring down at the road. My breath fogged up the windshield as I tried to process what I was seeing. This was the middle of nowhere, no houses for miles, no cars, no reason for a woman to be standing out here alone, dressed like that in sub-zero temperatures. I leaned forward, hand hovering over the horn when suddenly she twitched, not a normal movement, it was fast, unnatural, like a glitch in a video. Then her head snapped up. Her eyes, if you could even call them that, were just two black pits, sunken deep into her pale face. I didn't think, I just slammed the gas. My tires spun for a second before catching, and the SUV lurched forward, straight toward her. But just before I hit her, she vanished, not like she jumped out of the way, not like she ran, she was just gone. I didn't stop, I didn't slow down. I just kept driving, hands clenched so tight around the wheel my knuckles ached. Then the windows frosted over. My breath came out in thick clouds, and a deep, suffocating chill wrapped around me like a vice. And then I smelled it, rot, something old, something dead. My chest tightened, my fingers trembled, and then a whisper, right in my ear, "Let me in." I screamed and swerved, barely keeping the car from spinning out. My pulse pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. My mind was racing, screaming at me to not look in the mirror, to not turn around, but I did. And she was sitting in my back seat, her face inches from mine, her lips curled in a twisted grin, her black eyes leaking something thick and dark. Her frozen fingers twitched against the seat. "You should have stopped." I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out for a few seconds because the next thing I knew, I was skidding into a gas station parking lot, the car jerking to a stop so hard I nearly hit the pump. The second I threw it in park, I bolted out the door. The freezing air burned my lungs, but I didn't care. I just ran straight into the gas station, panting like I had just escaped a burning building. The cashier, a guy in his 50s with deep lines on his face, looked up from his magazine and frowned. "You okay?" he asked. I turned back to my car, expecting to see her standing there, but the back seat was empty, no frost, no smell, nothing. I swallowed hard and nodded, trying to catch my breath. I forced myself to walk back outside, heart hammering, and slowly checked the back seat. No sign of her. But as I slid into the driver's seat, my stomach dropped because on the back seat was a single wet, bare footprint, small, like a woman's. I didn't go home that night. I booked a cheap motel a few miles away, left the lights on, and sat awake until sunrise. When I finally got back on the road, I took a different route, the long way. I've never driven that stretch of highway again, and I never will. Story number 3, I found that out one winter night, driving through the backwoods of Pennsylvania. I was heading home from a friend's cabin deep in the mountains, a last-minute Christmas getaway. It was already past midnight, and the snow had started falling hard, the kind of heavy, silent snowfall that eats up the road and makes the whole world feel empty. My GPS was struggling to keep up, constantly rerouting, but I wasn't too worried. I had taken this route before. Then I saw the detour sign. It was old and faded, barely visible under the snow. Road closed, use alternate route. I cursed under my breath. I didn't remember any road closures, the GPS didn't say anything about it either. But sure enough, up ahead, I saw a row of construction barricades blocking the highway. Flashing yellow lights reflected off the snow. Annoyed, I slowed down and turned onto the alternate route. It was a narrow, twisting back road, the kind that looked barely maintained even in summer. The trees closed in on either side, heavy with snow, their branches forming a skeletal tunnel over the road. I kept driving, but something felt off. The farther I went, the thicker the trees became. The snow, once light and fluffy, seemed heavier, weighing down the air, swallowing the sound of my tires. Even my headlights seemed dimmer, like the darkness was pressing in. That's when I saw the first set of footprints. They ran alongside the road, fresh and deep in the snow, bare footprints, human. My stomach nodded. No one in their right mind would be walking barefoot out here, miles from anywhere, in a blizzard. I tried to ignore it, maybe a prank, maybe someone lost. Then I saw the second set and the third, dozens of them, all walking the same direction, following the road ahead. I told myself to turn around, something about this wasn't right. But when I glanced at my GPS, the screen flickered, then went black. I had no idea where I was. I swallowed hard, my fingers gripping the wheel. I pressed the gas, trying to shake the growing unease crawling up my spine. Then the radio crackled. The station I had been listening to, some late-night rock, sputtered out, replaced by static. Then, beneath the white noise, I heard it, a voice, faint, whispering, "Turn back." I sucked in a sharp breath, my hand shot out, twisting the dial, but every station was the same, static, and behind it, the whispers. I slammed the radio off. The road ahead twisted sharply, leading into an even denser patch of trees. My headlights barely cut through the dark now. My dashboard clock had frozen at 12:13 a.m. The snow seemed thicker, the air wrong, as if I wasn't supposed to be here. Then I saw them, figures standing just beyond the trees. At first, I thought they were just shadows, maybe tree trunks, the way the snow settled against them. But then they moved, tall, thin figures with hollow eyes, their skin a sickly pale that almost glowed in the dark. They stood perfectly still, watching me. Then they started walking, not toward the road, but parallel to it, keeping pace with my car. A cold, primal fear gripped my chest. My foot pressed harder on the gas, but the road was too slick, and I could feel the tires fighting for traction. I didn't dare stop, I didn't dare look away. They were getting closer, their faces were blank, mouths just dark slits, too wide, too wrong. Their legs moved awkwardly, like their bones were bending the wrong way. And then one of them smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched across its face, exposing rows of needle-like teeth. Something inside me snapped. I floored it. The car lurched forward, skidding dangerously, but I didn't care. The figures blurred past my windows, disappearing into the trees, but I could still feel them watching. Then the road ended, just like that. 1 second I was on a snow-covered back road, and the next I was staring at a wall of trees, no road beyond it, no sign of where I had come from. Panic surged through me. I slammed the brakes, the car fishtailing before coming to a stop inches from the trees. My breath came in ragged gasps. I threw the car into reverse, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, the road behind me was gone, only trees, endless, suffocating trees. A shadow moved behind me. I didn't turn around, I couldn't. The air inside the car grew thick, heavy, filled with the scent of rotting leaves and something foul. My breath fogged the windshield. Then a voice, not from the radio this time, but from the back seat, "You should not have come here." I felt something cold press against the back of my neck, fingers. I did the only thing I could think of. I slammed my foot down on the gas. The SUV surged forward. I braced for impact, but the moment my tires hit the tree line, everything went black. When I woke up, I was parked on the side of the original highway. The road closed, barricades were gone, no construction, no sign of a detour, just my car sitting in the middle of the empty road. My hands were ice cold, still gripping the wheel. My phone was back on, showing the time, 3:47 a.m. I had lost nearly 4 hours. I barely made it home. I didn't sleep for days after that. I kept expecting to wake up back on that road, trapped in the dark with those things. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear the whisper, "Turn back." Story number 4. I learned that the hard way one winter night, driving alone through the snow-covered mountains of Colorado. It was late, probably around 2 a.m., when I realized I had made a mistake. I had taken the scenic route to save time, but with the storm rolling in, I could barely see 5 feet in front of me. The road was narrow, winding along steep cliffs, and the snowfall was so heavy it swallowed my high beams. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour, no houses, no gas stations, just endless white and towering pine trees pressing in on both sides. Then my radio cut out. 1 second I was listening to some old rock station, and the next, static. I reached down, fiddling with a knob when something flashed in my headlights, a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, my tires skidding on the ice as my heart lurched into my throat. The car came to a stop just inches away. For a long second, I just sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to process what I was looking at. It was a woman, or at least something that looked like one. She was barefoot, wearing a thin dress soaked from the snow. Her long, tangled hair stuck to her pale face, her arms hanging limply at her sides, her lips cracked, her skin almost blue. She didn't move, didn't blink. I hesitated. I wasn't about to roll down my window and ask if she needed help, that's how horror movies start. But something about her felt wrong, off, like she didn't belong here. Then her head twitched, a small unnatural jerk, and she smiled. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a normal smile, it was too wide, stretching across her face in a way that made my skin crawl. Then she took a step forward. I didn't wait. I slammed my foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, plowing through the snow, and I braced for impact. But the moment my headlights touched her, she vanished, not jumped out of the way, not ran, just gone. I was shaking, my breath came out in rapid, foggy bursts as I sped down the road, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. My mind was racing, maybe I was seeing things, the storm, the lack of sleep, maybe it was just a weird trick of the light. But then, in the rearview mirror, she was sitting in my back seat. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, my hands trembling so badly I nearly swerved off the road. I refused to look again, staring straight ahead, chanting in my head that I was just imagining it. But I could feel her. The air inside the car grew thick, suffocating. The temperature plummeted, and my breath turned to ice on the windshield. The scent of rotting leaves filled my nose. Then a whisper, "Take me home." I screamed, swerved, almost lost control. Then nothing. The weight in the back seat lifted, the air warmed, the smell was gone. I raised a glance in the mirror, empty. My head was pounding, my pulse a violent drum against my ribs. I kept driving, hands slick with sweat, my entire body screaming to get off this road. Then my headlights hit something up ahead, another figure. No, not another, the same woman standing in the middle of the road again. Impossible. I had just left her behind me. I hit the brakes, tires skidding, but this time I didn't stop. I swerved around her, barely missing her as she stood perfectly still, watching me. Then I saw the sign, "Welcome to Blackwater." My stomach turned. That wasn't possible. Blackwater was a ghost town, an abandoned mining settlement left to rot decades ago. There were no roads leading to it, no reason I should be anywhere near it. But there it was, buildings half buried in snow, old street lamps covered in ice, windows gaping like open mouths. And then the lights came on, one by one. The street lamps flickered to life, casting an eerie yellow glow over the town. Windows lit up, a flickering neon sign buzzed to life above a diner. Then I saw them, people walking the streets. At first, I felt relief, civilization. Maybe I had just taken a wrong turn. But then I really looked at them, they weren't moving right. Their strides were stiff, unnatural. Some of them didn't even walk, they glided, their feet barely touching the snow. Their clothes were old-fashioned, tattered, and none of them had faces, just smooth, blank skin where eyes, noses, and mouths should have been. A choke sound escaped my throat. My foot pressed harder on the gas, desperate to get out of there. Then the diner door swung open, and she stepped out, the woman from the road. She belonged here, and she was smiling again. My vision tunneled, my mind screamed at me to move, to drive. But my car wasn't moving, it was stuck. The tires spun, digging into the snow, but I wasn't going anywhere. Then I felt them, hands grabbing at the car, pale fingers curling around the windows, the door handles, the frame, pressing against the glass. Dozens of them, faceless heads tilted in unison. Then the woman took a step forward. I fought to breathe, my hands were frozen to the wheel, my body refused to move. She reached the hood of my car, her bare feet sinking into the snow, her head tilted, her dark tangled hair falling over her face. Then in a slow, deliberate motion, she knocked on my windshield 3 times. I opened my mouth to scream, and everything went black. I woke up to the sound of knocking, daylight. My car was parked on the side of a normal highway, snow piled up around the tires. A state trooper stood outside, tapping on my window. I nearly cried. I rolled it down with shaking hands. "You all right?" he asked, eyeing me with concern. "We got a report about a car sitting here for hours. Thought you might be stranded." I swallowed, my throat raw. "Hours?" He nodded. "Since about 2 a.m. I glanced at my dashboard clock, it was 12:13 p.m. I had been sitting here for over 10 hours. The trooper helped me out of the car, asking me where I was coming from. When I told him I had taken the detour through Blackwater, his expression darkened. "You must be mistaken," he said slowly. "That road's been closed for years." My mouth went dry. I saw a detour sign. I drove through it. I saw the town. He shook his head. "There's no town back there." I didn't argue, I didn't say another word. I just thanked him, got in my car, and left as fast as I could. I took a different road home, and I never drive through the mountains at night anymore, because some roads, they don't take you home, they take you somewhere else, somewhere you don't come back from. Story number 5. I used to love driving at night, the quiet roads, the way the world seemed to slow down, the peaceful hum of my car's engine cutting through the darkness. Not anymore. Now I hate it because of what happened that winter night. I was driving home from my parents' house in rural Wisconsin. It was late, probably close to midnight, and the snow had just started falling. Big, fat flakes drifted down in slow motion, covering the empty road ahead. The highway was deserted, no other cars, no lights, just miles of endless trees on either side. My gas tank was half full, my heater was cranked, and I had an old playlist shuffling softly through the speakers. Then my headlights caught something up ahead, a hitchhiker, at least that's what I thought it was. He was standing on the side of the road, his head down, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his thin jacket. No bag, no gloves, no hat. He was dressed completely wrong for the freezing weather. As I got closer, my stomach twisted, his face was wrong. I don't know how else to describe it. His features were blurred off, like a photograph smudged by a careless fingerprint. His mouth was too wide, his skin too smooth, his eyes. I looked away. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to not stop, so I didn't. I drove right past him, gripping the wheel tight, my pulse pounding as I passed. He didn't even flinch, didn't lift his head, just stood there, motionless. I exhaled, relieved. Then my radio cut out. The music was suddenly replaced by static, a sharp hissing sound that made my skin crawl. I reached out to adjust the dial, but as I did, a voice, not through the speakers, but from behind me, said, "You should have stopped." I slammed the brake so hard my tires skidded on the ice, the back of my car fishtailing. My breath caught in my throat. My hands shook as I forced myself to look in the rearview mirror. Nothing. The back seat was empty. I let out a shaky laugh, just my mind playing tricks on me, the cold, the dark. I was imagining things. But then I noticed something, the hitchhiker was standing in the middle of the road, somehow ahead of me. I had just passed him. That was impossible. I jammed my foot on the gas. My tires spun, struggling for grip, and then I shot forward. I swerved around him, my breath coming in short, panic bursts. I didn't look at his face, I wouldn't. But as I passed, he moved, not naturally, not like a person. He glitched. 1 second he was still, the next he was closer. Then a thump, a heavy weight slammed onto my car, shaking the entire frame. My breath hitched, my hands turned clammy against the wheel. Then, scraping, something dragging across the roof, slow and deliberate, like fingers. I couldn't breathe, my mind raced, my pulse thundered in my ears. Then I heard it, that voice again, right outside my window, "Let me in." I screamed, my foot slamming on the gas, my car surging forward, the scraping sound tearing across the roof. I kept my eyes locked on the road, refusing to look. I drove like that for what felt like hours. Then suddenly the weight lifted, the air inside the car warmed, the radio crackled, then switched back to music as if nothing had happened. I didn't stop, didn't slow down. I kept going, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. Finally, I saw the lights of a gas station up ahead. I pulled in fast, my tires screeching against the wet pavement. I parked under the bright fluorescence, breathing hard, trying to calm my racing heart. I forced myself to check the roof, nothing, no dents, no scratches, just a thin layer of snow. I let out a shaky breath, feeling stupid, maybe I was just exhausted, hallucinating from the long drive. But as I got back into my car, my heart stopped. There on my windshield was a single wet handprint, too large, too distorted, and the fingers, they were too long. I never took that highway again, and I never stopped for hitchhikers because some things on the road, they aren't human. Story number 6. I used to think the scariest thing about winter night drives was black ice. I was wrong. It was the week before Christmas, and I was making the long drive from Chicago to my sister's house in Minnesota. It was late, well past midnight, and I was exhausted. The interstate was empty, just me and the occasional semi-truck roaring past, kicking up snow. That's when I saw it, a road sign I didn't recognize, exit 42, Black Hollow, next right. I had driven this route dozens of times, and I had never seen that exit before. I glanced at my GPS, no mention of Black Hollow. I chalked it up to fatigue, turned up the radio, and kept driving. A few minutes later, my headlights caught another sign, exit 42, Black Hollow, half mile. This time, my stomach twisted because I had just passed that sign. I knew I had. I shook my head, forcing a laugh, maybe I was losing it, maybe there really was an exit 42 and I had just never noticed before. Then, out of nowhere, a deer standing dead center in my lane. I barely had time to react. My foot slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching against the ice, my car fishtailing wildly. And then impact, the sound was sickening, a dull wet thud against the front of my car. I skidded to a stop, breathing hard, my pulse pounding in my ears, my hands shaking. I had hit it. But when I looked up, the road was empty, no deer, no blood, nothing, just endless highway stretching into the darkness. A wave of cold terror washed over me, my fingers gripped the wheel so hard they ached. I knew I had hit something, I felt it. I glanced at my rearview mirror, and my breath caught in my throat. A figure stood in the middle of the road, tall, motionless, staring. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its eyes on me. Then slowly, it lifted its arm and pointed, not at me, but at the exit ramp up ahead, exit 42, Black Hollow. I didn't want to go that way, every instinct in my body screamed at me to keep driving, to get as far away as possible. But the moment I hit the gas, my check engine light blinked on, then my radio died, then my headlights cut out. I was plunged into total darkness. I slammed on the brakes, hard hammering. My breath fogged up the windshield as I fumbled for my phone, no signal, of course. I sat there, gripping the wheel, staring into the inky blackness ahead. My car was dead, stranded. The only light came from the distant glow of the exit ramp street lamp. And then something knocked on my window, 3 slow, deliberate taps. I didn't move, didn't breathe, my fingers hovered over the lock button. Another knock, this time from the passenger side. I swallowed hard, my skin crawling. Slowly, I turned my head, nothing, just an empty stretch of road and the swirling snow. I was not getting out of this car. I reached for my keys, trying to restart the engine, and that's when I heard it, a whisper right next to my ear, "Wrong turn." I screamed, jerking away so fast I slammed my head against the window. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. Then my headlights flickered back on. For a split second, they illuminated something crawling across the road ahead, not an animal, not a person, something in between. Its limbs bent the wrong way, its skin stretched too tight over its bones, its mouth hung open in a twisted silence. Then the lights flickered off again, and I heard something dragging itself toward my car. I lost it. I twisted the keys so hard I thought they'd snap, and my car roared to life. I didn't think, I didn't look. I just floored it. My tires spun against the ice, my heart slamming against my ribs as I tore away from that exit as fast as my car would take me. I didn't stop, not for gas, not for coffee, not even when my hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel. I drove until I saw the first sign of civilization, an all-night diner on the edge of a small town. I stumbled inside, still trembling, still struggling to breathe. The waitress took one look at me and frowned. "You okay, hon?" I nodded, though I was anything but. She poured me a cup of coffee, and I sat there, staring blankly out the window at the snow-covered parking lot. Then casually, she asked, "You come down from Highway 47? I blinked. Yeah. Why?" She hesitated. "Did you see the exit?" My blood ran cold. I swallowed hard. Black hollow. Her face paled. She nodded slowly, then in a hushed voice, she said, "That road doesn't exist." I felt my stomach drop. "But I saw it," I whispered. "I almost took it." She licked her lips, glanced toward the door, then leaned in close. "People who take that road," she shivered, "they don't come back." I stared at her, my pulse thundering in my ears. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it was just my imagination. But then, out of the corner of my eye, through the frosted diner window, I saw something standing by my car, tall, motionless, staring. And this time I saw its face, it was mine. Story number 7. I was never afraid of the dark, not until that night. It was late December, and I was driving through rural Pennsylvania, heading home for Christmas. Snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, and the roads were nearly deserted. It was one of those highways where you could drive for miles without seeing another car, just endless trees pressing in from both sides. I should have been paying closer attention, I should have never taken that exit. It started with my GPS glitching. I had been following the route home, my playlist humming quietly through the speakers, when the screen suddenly flickered. The map stuttered, froze, then recalibrated with a new set of directions. I frowned, it told me to take an exit I didn't recognize. I was confused, I had driven this way before. There were no detours, no back roads. But the screen insisted, flashing a sharp right turn in 500 feet. I should have ignored it, but the snow was getting heavier, and I figured maybe it was redirecting me around the worst of it. So I turned. The moment I did, I felt it, something was wrong. The road was narrow, winding through a dense forest, no streetlights, no road signs, just my headlights cutting through the snow, illuminating the skeletal trees looming on either side. I checked my GPS again, no signal. That's when the radio cut out. At first, it was just a few seconds of static, then the sound of breathing, deep, slow, wet. I shut it off, my fingers trembling, a pit forming in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I kept driving, the snow was falling harder now, and my tires struggled for traction. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to stay calm. Then I saw the sign, "Welcome to Marrow Wood." My heart stopped. There was no town called Marrow Wood, not on any map, not anywhere. I passed the first building, a gas station with boarded-up windows. The rusted-out pumps stood like gravestones, half buried in snow. Then came the houses, they weren't abandoned, not exactly. The lights were on, but there were no cars in the driveways, no footprints in the snow, just dim, flickering lights in the windows casting long, unnatural shadows across the empty streets. A figure moved behind one of the curtains. I nearly slammed on the brakes, the shape was wrong, thin and elongated, like a shadow stretched too far. My hands clenched the wheel. I didn't want to be here, I needed to turn around. That's when I saw them, people lining the sidewalks, standing perfectly still in the snow, their backs to me, their heads tilted slightly to one side, dozens of them, motionless, faceless. I gasped, my pulse thundering, my breath fogged up the windshield as I struggled to keep control of the car. I pressed harder on the gas, desperate to get out of there, but the road didn't end. It just kept going, twisting deeper into the town, leading me past more houses with flickering lights, past more people standing in the snow, watching, waiting. I was trapped. Then up ahead, a woman standing in the middle of the road. Her back was to me, her long black hair hanging in frozen strands, her dress thin, torn at the edges, barefoot in the snow. I swerved to avoid her, and suddenly she was in front of me again, no sound, no movement, just there. I slammed the brakes, my tires skidding on the ice. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I stared at her motionless form. Then slowly, she turned her head, not her body, just her head, a full, unnatural twist until she was staring right at me. Her face, oh God, her face wasn't hers, it was mine, a grotesque, hollow copy. Her lips stretching into a jagged, impossibly wide grin. And then she took a step toward me. I floored it. The car lurched forward, barreling toward her, but the moment my headlights touched her, she vanished, not gone, just somewhere else. I heard it before I saw it, a whisper, "Let me in." My blood ran cold, it wasn't outside, it was inside. I didn't want to look, I had to look, the rearview mirror. My own reflection was smiling, not a normal smile, too wide, too many teeth. And then slowly, it started to crawl out of the mirror. I screamed, I swerved, my tires barely gripping the icy road as I yanked the wheel, desperate to stay ahead of whatever was behind me. Then the road ended, a dead end, no turnoff, no exit, just an old wooden sign covered in frost. I wiped away the ice with a trembling hand, 4 words carved into the wood, "You were never here." The world lurched, everything tilted, and then I was back on the highway, just like that, no snow, no town, no marrow wood, just the empty road stretching ahead, my car still in motion, like none of it had ever happened. But when I checked my clock, 5 hours had passed. I don't take back roads anymore, I don't follow my GPS blindly, and I never drive at night because some places, they don't exist, not on a map, not in this world. But they're still there, and if you're not careful, you'll find them, or worse, they'll find you. Story number 8. I don't drive at night anymore, not after what happened on Highway 93. It was winter break, and I was heading home from college, a 6-hour drive through the winding back roads of Montana. It was the kind of trip where you don't see a gas station for endless forests pressing in from both sides, the occasional flicker of an abandoned barn in the distance. I left later than I should have, and by the time I hit the last stretch of road, the sun had long since disappeared. The night was heavy, thick, the snow was falling in fat, slow flakes. My headlights barely cut through the darkness. The road was empty, at least, I thought it was. I was about 3 hours from home when I saw something on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer, maybe, but as I got closer, my stomach clenched. It was a woman. She was standing at the edge of the highway, just past the guardrails, staring at me as I approached. Her dress was thin, tattered, hanging loose over her frame. Her long black hair clung to her face, wet from the snow, and her eyes were too wide, too dark. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing my gaze forward. I wasn't stopping, not out here, not in the middle of nowhere. I passed her, but then thump. My entire car shook, like something had just jumped onto the roof. My breath hitched, my heart pounded against my ribs. I checked my mirrors, scanning the darkness, but I saw nothing. Then scratch, a long, slow scraping sound running across the roof of my car, like fingernails. I swallowed hard, my fingers trembled against the wheel. Then a whisper, low and close, "You shouldn't have left me." I swerved, my tires barely gripping the icy road. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I struggled to keep control. And then silence. The weight was gone, the car was still. I forced myself to breathe, just my imagination, the wind, the snow, my tired mind playing tricks on me. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shape in the back seat. I nearly crashed. I slammed the brakes, my tires skidding against the pavement. My heart thundered as I turned slowly, forcing myself to look, nothing. The back seat was empty, just dark fabric and an old hoodie I had tossed back there earlier. I let out a shaky laugh, running a hand over my face. I needed sleep, needed coffee, I was just seeing things. Then I looked in the rearview mirror, and my own reflection smiled at me. I floored the pedal and slammed against the gas. My car roared forward, my pulse pounding in my ears as I tore through the empty highway, the snow whipping against my windshield. I didn't look in the mirror again, not until I saw the sign, "Welcome to Coldwell." My stomach dropped. There was no town called Coldwell, not on this route, not anywhere. I glanced at my GPS, no signal. I passed the first few buildings, an old diner with its neon sign flickering weakly, a gas station with no cars, its windows covered in frost. Then the houses, their lights were on, but the windows were wrong, like painted eyes, too dark, too hollow. And the people, they weren't moving, they just stood on the sidewalks, motionless, their heads tilted slightly, watching, waiting. A child stood in the snow, his hands at his sides, his mouth slightly open, but his breath wasn't fogging in the cold air. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. I needed to get out of here. I pushed down on the gas, but the road kept going. There was no exit, no turnoff, just more Coldwell, more houses, more people. Then a woman in the middle of the road, the same woman, her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, her hands reaching toward me. I jerked the wheel, the car spun out, sliding on the ice, my tires struggling for traction. And then darkness. When I woke up, I was sitting in my parked car on the side of the highway. The engine was running, the snow was falling, and my clock was 5 hours ahead, like none of it had happened. Except there was something in my passenger seat, something small, cold, a single blackened handprint. And outside, standing just past the tree line, was the woman, waiting, smiling. I don't drive at night anymore because I know she's still out there, waiting for me to take the wrong road, to make the wrong turn. And next time, I don't think she'll let me leave.